You've got a great idea for a small business, but you just can't get it off the ground. You want to be your own boss, set your own hours. Well, new year means new opportunities, and Shopify's got you covered to help get your venture off the ground. Shopify makes it easy to manage your growing business. You can get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. And they help with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard. Don't kick yourself next holiday season when your 2025 resolution list looks the same as it does today. Make it happen with Shopify. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/income.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Hello, it is Tuesday, the 21st of January 2025. Welcome along to the Somewhere on Earth podcast from the Evergreen podcast community. And with us today is Wairimu Gitahi joining me from, I assume, Nairobi. Is that where you are?
Yes, I'm in Nairobi. The sunny city of Nairobi.
Sunny, you said?
Yes, very, very sunny, very hot. Lovely.
A bit of rain in the afternoon, maybe?
Not too much, at least in Nairobi. No? Rarely,
okay.
But really nice.
Yeah. I made the mistake. It's never a mistake to go to Nairobi, but the mistake I did make was going to Nairobi in the British summer. It was in July, and it was so cold in Nairobi.
Yeah, it is cold in July.
It can be.
Yeah.
I was thinking, how come we're so close to the equator? But it's quite high up, isn't it?
Yeah,
So there's that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that bombshell, I think we should do a little bit of podcasting. What do you reckon?
Sure. Let's go for it.
Okay, here we go. And coming up today, hate speech and misinformation are on the loose, and hardly anyone's doing anything to stop it. Welcome to life on the big social media platforms for many users in the great continent of Africa. Content moderation seems to be on its way out everywhere, basically, what with the ongoing shenanigans at X and Meta. But for many in Africa, it was never really there in the first place. There's new research now about the online experience for Kiswahili speakers. We'll be taking a look at that research. And we'll take a listen to the village with its own podcast. Yes, in an age of ubiquitous podcasting, it's taken until now for one village in rural England to be able to claim it has the UK's first ever village podcast. It's all right here on Somewhere on Earth. So then it looks as if 2025 will turn out to be the year that the moderators left the building. Meta is doing away with independent fact checkers on Facebook and Instagram. Instead, the online safety of millions of users will be in the hands of X-style community notes, where it's really up to the users to check the accuracy of content. It seems that standards are slipping, unless that is you're in a region that never really had much online moderation in the first place. Across much of Africa, tiny content teams have been responsible for entire countries or regions. Ironically, there are actually plenty of content moderators in Africa. It's just that they're mainly working as outsourced labour to support content moderation for the big platforms in the US. Well, let's discuss this further with you, Ania. So there's a report about this. Tell us a bit more.
Yes, so the Centre for Democracy and Technology report that's come out about this, it says social media is huge in Africa. According to the Statista website, there are approximately 245 million Facebook users. That's from 2022. On X, these are their own sources. They say there are about 23 million people that use the platform in 10 countries. That includes Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa and Kenya. Instagram is the most popular platform in some countries, and TikTok is on the rise across the continent. Now, the researchers surveyed and interviewed 143 frequent Kiswahili or Swahili speaking social media users, and they found that the majority of them were concerned about the proliferation of misleading and inciting content on social media platforms.
So why is there a problem moderating Swahili posts in particular?
The main challenge is that social media platforms often lack the necessary resources. So that includes human moderators and machine learning models to effectively moderate content in Swahili. So if you look at Meta, they apply uniform policies to all Swahili users, wherever these users might be in the world. So you could be writing a post in the US in Swahili, and that's going to be moderated by the same policy that, say, someone writing in Kenya. TikTok has a more local approach, but the variations in the language are overlooked as they mainly hire content moderators in Kenya. So they will be unfamiliar with subtle language or cultural differences outside their country. There is a local Tanzanian platform, Jamii Forums, and they hire native moderators from each Swahili-speaking country who review content generated within their own nations. The report says this ensures that the moderators understand the local context and cultural nuances, allowing them to provide more effective and relevant content moderation for users on Jamii Forums.
Right, so that's presumably on the human side of things. But what about when it comes to AI moderation?
Now, language matters because it affects the accuracy of AI-driven content moderation and the effectiveness of human moderators. Different languages require different sets of data and machine learning models. So if you don't put the correct data in, you won't get the correct analysis out. So we're back to this rubbish in, rubbish out analogy that I keep on talking about. If you use Swahili from Kenya, and that's used in an AI, it won't work as well if you're then using that model to moderate Swahili in, say, the DRC or Burundi, because the language is simply different. Now, obviously, any languages based in AI Africa is not going to cover so many of the languages that are spoken there. Tanzania is home to 100 indigenous languages. Kenya has more than 40. So it may feel like a losing battle here, but much can be done to improve the current situation. The languages are also evolving incredibly quickly, and users will often mix languages and add English into this mix as well on their posts, making AI moderation impossible. You'd have to create an AI model that used, Sheng, which I believe is a version of Swahili that younger people uses, with a more traditional version of Swahili with English. It's not going to happen. Given these complexities, as well as the scarcity of data sets in these languages, it's easy to see why there are so many problems with moderating content using AI-driven models.
It's so complex, isn't it? Wairimu, what do you make of what you're hearing from Ania there about this report?
Do you know that even when she talks about like the slang, what she's referring to as Sheng, which we have here in Kenya, that mostly young people speak, but even older people, even that has variations because it depends on which generation you come. For example, my generation speaks a different version of Sheng if I was to speak it than a younger generation. So it makes the whole thing very complex, yeah? And also, she particularly mentioned that when we speak here, if we're speaking Kiswahili, for example, we mix it with our, mother tongue and so on and so forth. So that makes it even more complex. So actually, I was trying to think what could really be the solution, because even if we had moderators, there would have to be moderators that are in charge of smaller communities, smaller regions. Of course, it would require much more resources to do that. Would we have enough data to be able to have like AI models that are able to, translate and moderate? What means one thing sometimes to, like, for example, I realized that sometimes I could be speaking to my parents, even in my own mother tongue, but sometimes some things had a different meaning for her when she was my age and now. So I think in general, what we're trying to say is that this issue of language is quite complex. And perhaps that's why they're resolving to different regions and different communities being their own gods, I mean, of course, that has challenges in itself, because who does what? Who says what? If I say this is right and the other person in the other region says it's wrong, so at the end of the day, what do we do? Because these things sometimes are the reason why we have hate speech. We can end up even having civil wars, political wrangles, and so on and so forth. So this is it's really a complex situation.
Yeah, because I'm assuming then that you would use the social media in English for some of your dealings, and then in, I assume, Swahili, but you can tell me otherwise, for other stuff. I suppose what I'm fishing around for, Wairimu, is do you have a different online experience when you're using the English language versions of these social media versus Swahili?
Yes, I do. And I do because, for example, I speak Kenyan Kiswahili, and there is the Tanzanian Kiswahili, which is more or less in the standard sort of Kiswahili. So that also brings complications when you're trying to get a message across. Yeah. For example, I realized that, let's say, my brothers and sisters in Tanzania tend to feel like sometimes Kenyans are not as polite. If they went to a shop, for example, so they would to ask how much something costs, of if the person, maybe it's a small kiosk, maybe the shopkeeper, if they have something, let's say if they're selling, I don't know, I want to buy a loaf of bread, for example. If I translate how Tanzanians normally ask in Kiswahili, if I do a direct translation to English, it would be like, I pray that you sell me bread. In Kenya, if I went to a shop, I've tried it just to see the reaction. So when I say I pray that you sell me bread, in Kiswahili, in Tanzanian Kiswahili mostly it would be naomba uniuzie mkate. But in Kenya, if you said that, the shopkeeper would just think, okay, first of all, you're joking, you're crazy or something, because we just say, give me bread, or how much is bread? So it would be like in Kiswahili, nipatie mkate, So I realized one time I was in Dar es Salaam, the capital of Tanzania, and I said, my Kiswahili version of give me bread. And the guy asked me wow, that's not very polite, And usually I would be I'm speaking Kenyan Kiswahili. It's not like I'm being impolite. So I had to explain to him, but still he was not very convinced. So I'm thinking, if this is the case, even when we are facing each other face to face, can you imagine when it's the written word, where there's no emotion, when I don't have the time to say, I didn't mean to offend you, I'm very sorry. So that's why I'm trying to say it's quite a complicated thing. And so if someone is doing a translation of that, they would have to really understand the context and who they are speaking to and which region they are speaking to in terms of Kiswahili, because there are millions of people who speak Kiswahili in Africa. So I think you understand why this issue is very complicated around Africa in particular.
Yeah, no, I get it. And then, not to mention the subtleties and nuances between generations and the way that, say, a grandmother speaks to how a daughter might do, for instance, or a granddaughter. That's interesting. What about, though, I mean, we're coming back to content moderation here, which is about the extreme ends of language, isn't it? So in your buying a loaf of bread example, a content moderator, they would need to make the call. Is there anything offensive about what's going on here? No, it's just somebody asking for bread. One of them is a bit more forthright than the other. That's very different from somebody saying, I want to kill all members of a certain tribe, isn't it? Am I just being I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate, and I mean to be provocative a little bit. But do you see what I mean? Content moderation is really about saying the vast majority of the stuff is fine. That is extreme. You can't say that, whatever the context or the cultural aspect. Hate speech and will stand out.
I totally understand you, but this bread example is still quite important. Let me tell you why. in my own experience and in many Kenyans' experience, for example, the Tanzanians tend to massage their language. So we are more, as you say, we are more direct. So, okay, for example, sometimes I feel it would even maybe be easier if you're speaking Kenyan Kiswahili to actually create perhaps a more direct damage. Because there wouldn't be sometimes, in my view, a confusion, potentially. I mean, unless, because even when you check, I remember one time I was discussing with a colleague of mine about even rap music. If you listen to Kenyan rap music in Kiswahili and you listen to Tanzanian rap music in Kiswahili, which is usually talking about a social issue, social impact and stuff like that, you'll realize that the Tanzanians sort of like massage. You have to listen a little bit more. It's much more poetic. What exactly do they mean? As opposed to the Kenyan one, which is straightforward. Now, I'm not trying to say that every time Kenyans are straightforward and Tanzanians are not. But I'm trying to say is that sometimes, even in the language itself, it would take you a while to be able to understand or to actually, as a moderator, say, this is wrong. It can create confusion. Because if we are two moderators, let's say I'm from Tanzania, or I'm from DRC, or I'm from Kenya, or Rwanda, or Burundi, there could be a confusion that that's not what I meant. I meant that this thing was very serious and maybe could lead to, people killing each other. But I did not say that the people are going to kill each other soon. So I think that those are the complexities. And then remember that sometimes when you're speaking Kiswahili, as I said earlier, we do mix it with our own mother tongue. So that makes even moderation more difficult. And that's why I see why the moderators would have such a difficulty. So I'm imagining when the people have to analyze and moderate themselves within the communities, how much more difficult that will be.
Now, another issue here is that some of these content moderators, they report having PTSD, don't they? Some of the stuff that they have to go through and witness and see, so the rest of us don't have to.
Yeah, I think that's very complicated because, as you say, they have to listen to this and watch this stuff so as to make a decision of whether it should go. I mean, it's okay to have it on the platforms or not, yeah? And I think going from how they seem to have experience on these jobs, the issues we've talked about culture, about interpretation, about language, I think this makes it even much more difficult for them. And I'm not sure how much training they have. And even when they have to look at this kind of disturbing, you could say, information, I'm not sure whether they have like sessions where they can do feedback and so on and so forth. So translating language to me still stands as one of the most difficult things in relation to technology.
Wairimu, thank you. Fascinating. Thanks for that.
Flex your business with an American Express Business Gold Card. You'll earn 4 times membership rewards points on your top 2 eligible spending categories, like transit and electronics, each month, on up to $150K in combined purchases per year. Plus, you can now earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold, built for business by American Express.
Right, so just before we move on to talk about podcasting from the village, let's just hear about talking about the village, our fellow villagers in this lovely Somewhere on Earth community, because as you well know, folks, we put a little shout out before the seasonal break, to see if you had any requests of programs that you were interested in, that you enjoyed, and you wanted us to mention in our best of. And some of the comments, sorry, we didn't get to fit them into the program that we actually made, but they're still really good. So I think we should hear them. So let's just have this one from Alex in central Kenya, so not far away from you, Wairimu. Alex says, you've been asking for your favourite podcast episodes from 2024. My suggestion is from way back in March. And this is all about the internet in West Africa. When will it be fixed? That's the question we were asking, because one of these undersea cables had been broken. And Alex says, what surprised me was just how much of our internet infrastructure is basically cables lying on the ocean floor. And as if that's not vulnerable enough, the world hasn't had a governing body in charge of this until very recently, as I discovered in your December the 11th episode, says Alex. Yes, that's when we talked about the ITU, wasn't it? I remember that one. So really, I think just to say, Alex, we'll do more on submarine cables in the year ahead. So then you can nominate them as your best of in 2025, maybe. And of course, just as Alex was writing that, or around that time, this whole issue of undersea cables being compromised became rather topical over Christmas, because I think it was on Christmas Day, there was this Russian oil tanker, the Eagle S, that was suspected of damaging power and telecoms cables off the coast of Finland, I think between Finland and Estonia. And this whole thing has escalated into geopolitics. You know, the boat being grounded. Can you ground a boat? But you know what I mean. It's obviously the wrong word to use. And it's all got a little bit tricky and kind of got into the headlines for anybody who's following the news over Christmas. That issue became and continues to be very topical. So thank you for that, Alex. We'll keep an eye on that. And let's have a bit of audio from the excellent Jason Snowden. Here goes.
Hi, Gareth and Ania and everyone who runs the show. Really been enjoying the podcast over the past months. Is it a year? I don't know how long it's been anyway. It's been great. Some really good conversations, but I really enjoyed, perhaps strangely, the interview with the CEO of Evergreen. I think it was really interesting to hear his thoughts on how podcast industry has been developing and where it may go. And he was just really frank and interesting. So keep it up. Thanks.
Yeah, well, cheers, Jason. Thanks very much. Yes, that was the interview we had with Michael De La Hoya, CEO of Evergreen Podcast. He was good, wasn't he? So we'll try and get Michael back on again. I'm sure that'll be by popular demand. Cheers, Jason. Cheers, Alex. Cheers, everybody who got in touch. Cheers, everybody who's going to get in touch. Remember, on the socials, we're very easy to find. Soap Tech, SOEP Tech. You can email us. So that's hello@somewhereonearth.co. And you can WhatsApp us, but you'll have to go and look the number up because I haven't got it in front of me. But either way, just get in touch. You know how to do that by now. And I think we should move on. Well, now, for the UK's first ever dedicated village podcast. That's what the Strettons Podcast is calling itself. The pod is aimed at a group of small villages in the lovely rural county of Shropshire, just bordering Wales. I'm from near there, just over the border. Anyway, enough about me. So you might say, yes, yet another podcast. Perhaps you think you've heard it all before and maybe even downloaded and subscribed to it. But there is a bit of a tech story behind this podcast as well, as I've been hearing from producers Sian Lovegrove and Pete Johnson. And Sian began by telling me how it all came about.
Well, I came to Church Stretton about 5 months ago. I'd been working abroad in the Far East and East Africa, and I wanted to meet people and make friends. And I thought, what better idea than to start a podcast, and then I'd go around interviewing people and meeting people that way. So the idea was to do an audio village magazine. That's where it came from.
Now, what about people listening who'll be thinking, there are millions of podcasts out there. You know, we could do an item about a podcast like we could have 50 podcasts every edition and we still wouldn't scratch the surface. So what makes this distinctive, and why are we talking to you on a technology programme?
Well, what makes this distinctive is that it is the first village podcast. I can't find any online at all. So it's easily the first village podcast in the UK, which means that we're changing the media from text media to audio. And I was thinking, why don't we provide content to the place where people consume it? And that's in their hands, it's in their phones. People are not buying daily newspapers and magazines now, they're listening to podcasts. So why not make a village magazine and provide it in audio format? So that was where it came from. So really, the technology is the podcast, but I have been using a little bit of voice cloning in some of the parts of the podcast. So, for example, we have a few Ukrainian refugees here, and one of them wanted me to help her set up a cake business. She's very good at making cakes. So she said, can I do a Ukrainian cake recipe? And I said, yes, absolutely fine. But she couldn't speak English. But she was so keen to do the cake that I thought, what can I do to help her? I can't possibly teach her enough English. So why don't I clone her voice? So I got her to read some basic English. And even that, she was skipping every fourth or fifth word because it was so difficult. I managed to get enough to clone her voice using 11 labs. And then she gave me the recipe and the instructions in English. And then I turned it into a script. I put in all the common English grammar mistakes. And then I was able to overlay that onto the sounds of her cooking that I recorded in her kitchen.
Wow. It's a whole combination of voice cloning and editing and using technology to achieve something you couldn't have done probably even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. So you're hyper-local. I think that's another aspect to this story, because a lot of podcasts, probably including this very one that I'm presenting now, we want to be global, we want to maximise our audience, we want people listening all over the place. Now, I'm sure you wouldn't say no if you had listeners in New Zealand or anywhere, but clearly your primary audience is the people in your immediate area. That already makes it feel quite different. It goes from broadcasting to narrowcasting, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. We are aiming it at people that live in this area. But looking at the stats, we've got people from all over the world. And what I really want to do is to start a movement of community podcasts, villages and towns across the UK. Why don't other towns and villages do this? You know, it's been so successful here. Pete and I have become local celebrities, haven't we, Pete?
Yeah, it's weird actually, because we put the first one out thinking, okay, that's gone. And Sian and I were in town together. And people were coming up to us, this is like 3 days in, going, we've heard your podcast. And we're going, really? Oh, wow, yes. And we've told Mrs. So-and-so, and she does it. Was that Joan so-and-so on it the other day? Because we do Vox Pops as well, you see. And it's been quite incredible.
You talk to people at bus stops, don't you?
I do, but Peter is not so comfortable talking to strangers on the street, so I have to do that. But really, what I would like is for people across the world to listen to it and think, blimey, is that how they live in rural England? I had no idea, you know, so that we would become a point of interest for people abroad to actually see what the culture is like in rural England.
Curiously, one thing that we've started to pick up on is that people like to hear other voices. I mean, not professional voices. I mean, Sian is very good at doing Vox Pops and so on, and we've got some lovely pieces which needed a heck of a lot of editing to tighten them up. But those have been incredibly popular. So unfortunately, a lot of them at the moment are elderly people, and that's one of our problems insofar as, well, we want to be broad as possible on age range and also demographic.
Yeah, well, I mean, speak of demographics, you interviewed 92-year-old Trevor Morris, didn't you? This local with a really colourful history and his reminiscences. And that brought to me almost like an oral history component to what you're doing.
Which is exactly what Pete was wanting, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's what I want. One of the problems, I've been living in Stretton now for 26 years, and I was still working. I was working at Radio 2 and coming back home and finding out all these people, very interesting people. And I thought, really, these we should have some audio archive of these people, these voices, local and also incomes as well. But I didn't have the wherewithal nor the time to do it. And this local village podcasting idea is brilliant, because at least you might not be able to use it there and then, but you've got it. And of course, these dear people die, and then you think, well, didn't you speak to Mr. So-and-so? Well, no, we missed him, but we've got Mrs. So-and-so and whatever. So it's quite fulfilling to be able to do it and to give them the space to say what they want to say. I mean, all right, nudged one way and another in an interview format, sort of. But it's amazing what comes out. And I think with the Trevor Morris thing, let go, the detail that came out from him and the colour was just amazing.
So what do you think? Would you like a local village or locality podcast? Would you listen to that, do you think, Wairimu?
Yeah, very much. In fact, when I was listening to that story, I was just thinking about, telling like local stories, community stories is a very African thing. because of the whole thing of African storytelling. And some years back, I made a decision to start recording my parents, because I realized that the generations that are coming will, even if they have pictures and so on and so forth, they'll not hear their stories. Like, my mom is a great storyteller. Since we were small, let's say here, if the lights go off, she would like tell us stories about her past, about some of them were just mythical stories, so not particularly like, something that actually happened. And I was thinking that tradition more or less has been, lost in Africa. So I think using technology to actually bring it back is a really wonderful thing. So I started recording like my mother each time I go, and so on and so forth. And I plan to do a lot of editing. And I know that my nieces, my nephews, the people who will come many years after will be able to hear what they say. And one last thing I wanted to say is that over the years, I've found that people are more intimate, let's say if you're recording them, like an audio recording, as opposed to a video recording. So I still think that radio, podcasts, audio recording still provides some level of intimacy and depth that, in my view, other medium do not provide. So I'm really, I think it's a great, great story.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that. Well, there you go. That'll do for this particular podcast. And I found that WhatsApp number now. It's code 44 7486 329 484. Remember that we are with Evergreen. Lots of great podcasts on the Evergreen community. And let's do a few little credits. So you've just been hearing today from Wairimu Gitahi, and we have the editor, producer, and also we heard her at the top, Ania Lichtarowicz. The production manager is Liz Tuohy, and I'm Gareth. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. It's Michael Calore, Director of Consumer Tech and Culture at Wired, here with my colleagues, senior writer Lauren Good.
Hello.
And Wired contributor Zoe Schiffer.
Hey, everyone.
We're here to tell you about our new podcast, Uncanny Valley, a show about the people, power, and influence of Silicon Valley.
Every week, we get together to talk about how technology and culture from the Valley is influencing our everyday lives. We dig into questions like, will we ever get our privacy back? Is OpenAI for real? And how are Silicon Valley billionaires impacting U.S. elections? The first episode of Uncanny Valley comes out on October 31st. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.